Hi, you're watching DNA Today, a multi-award winning genetics podcast where we explore everything to do with genetics, from CRISPR to rare diseases to new research. We have won the Science and Medicine Podcast Award for many years now. We have hundreds of episodes, and we really hope you enjoy these conversations where we dive into so many genetic concepts. I'm Kira Dineen, a certified genetic counselor and your host. A week ago, I moderated a session at the 3rd Connecticut Genetic Counselors Association annual educational conference. Every year we host this at the gorgeous Jackson Laboratories for Genomic Medicine in Farmington, Connecticut, which, fun fact, I was at the grand opening back in October 2014. I even recapped it on, get this, episode 6 of DNA Today. If you want a blast from the past, the link is in the show notes there. And well before that, I was a preteen touring the headquarters of Jax in Bar Harbor, Maine to see what all these famous mouse models were and where their home was. So you could say I've been a long-time fan of Jax, so it's always such a pleasure to go there for conferences and a very pinch me moment when I'm actually on the Jax stage. As you will hear, we recorded this panel, so it was a live podcast episode I'm sharing with you now. In this panel, we explore economics of genetic counseling by focusing on the current financial climate, the role of genetic counselors in healthcare, and the importance of adaptability and networking for career development, which you know I am big on networking. We discuss challenges faced by students and professionals in the field, the need for expanded roles, and the significance of engaging with industry and policy to secure the future of genetic counseling. And a big thank you to CTGCA, the Connecticut Genetic Counselors Association, and Jax for hosting us to record this live podcast episode. It was really cool to be able to record and have a live sort of studio audience, and we take a bunch of audience questions at the end. And per usual, more information and links in the show notes. I will let Sam Wesoli take it away with introducing the panel, including our amazing all-star panelists.
Our 1 o'clock session is titled The Economics of Genetic Counseling, How Financial Forces Are Shaping the Future. This is a panel discussion hosted by our lovely Kira Dineen. We know she's the founder and CEO of Gene Pool Media and the host and producer of DNA Today. She is going to be holding this panel for 3 additional speakers. Our first two, everybody's most left is Ellen Matlaw, who is the CEO of My Gene Council. Maria Geyer is next after that, my fearless leader, the program director of the Yukon Genetic Counseling Training Program. And Samantha Baxter, who is the Associate Director of Genetic and Genomic Data Sharing at Broad. Thank you all for coming, and we're looking forward to hearing from you all.
Hello, everybody. Hope you all had a lovely lunch. Thanks, Sam, for the introduction. As Sam was talking about, for those that are trickling in, we're going to be talking about, and I guess it's really big behind me, the economics of genetic counseling. And what's a fun twist to this? If you don't know or just walking in, I host a genetics podcast called DNA Today. So this is actually a live podcast, and the episode comes out on Friday. You all get early access and in person. So yeah. So part of the reason I'm also telling you this is because if you have questions, which you will, I shouldn't say if, when you have questions at the end, so far we've been really good about using the mics. Keep doing that. I know some of us are really loud, like me and Connor. We don't need mics, but your voice won't be in the episode if you don't use the mic. Also, you're going to be in the episode if you use the mic. So know that your episode is your episode. Your question is going to be, heard by people, so outside of this room. So that's also a disclaimer for everybody. But anyway, that's the housekeeping. I am with such an amazing panel. Can we all just have a round of applause for how amazing the panel is? And we've got to get right into it because, per usual, I have way more questions than I have time for, and then we want audience questions. So just to set us up, Sam, I might tag you in first. How would you describe the current financial climate of the genomics industry, and how is it trickling down to affect genetic counselors? Obviously, just starting the conversation, because you could probably do that for an hour.
I actually do give this talk for an hour and sometimes can ramble on for 90 minutes, but I'll try to make it far less than that and explaining. I think we all can feel it in our guts that it's not great. I've been doing interviews with various people across the kind of ecosystem over the last year and a half, trying to figure out what this not great feeling is. And so I've broken it down into, our main two sectors where we work as genetic counselors are really hospitals and genetic testing labs. But underneath that is a variety of markets that are having influence on that. So we're talking about not just hospitals that we see at the front, but hospital administration behind it. A third of hospitals are operating in the red, and that's actually an improvement. And that stat is from before all the cuts to grants. And one of our biggest, we don't just work at hospitals, we're primarily in academic medical centers, which means that they get grant funding. So that 37% is probably a good number at this point. We also have, insurance, and insurance is in one of its worst years in a while. I know it's kind of hard to have sympathy for insurers, but really they are a part of our ecosystem. And there's a lot of genetic counselors who work there, and they're having a hard year as well. We're also seeing an influx of AI and VC, and with all the swings and changes in the government and with, variety of markets, there's also like some hesitation as well. I think there are some markets that are doing well. Genetic testing labs have notoriously not been, have been in the red, have not been in the black, but with a lot of shakeouts coming, there's actually been some improvement in reimbursement. And so we're seeing some upsides there. I think Ellen actually also had some great comments. There are some sectors that are doing well. And so we should be paying attention to those. The way that this impacts genetic counselors is when, companies are going into the red, and all of healthcare companies, as we learned, people were saying earlier, they're going to be tighter with the purse strings. And unfortunately, genetic counselors often bring to the table value and not revenue. And it can be really hard for us sometimes to advocate for ourselves with hard numbers. The problem is when you bring in value, it can sometimes be harder to make the case for why you are somebody who should be kept. And so I think what we're often seeing is we're sort of secondary. It's not about us. Nobody's against genetic counselors, but we are really vulnerable to these swings. And we're just going through a hard time in the economy.
Ellen, I'd love for you to chime in. Yes. So let me start with what I think is the obvious question, which for those of you sitting in the audience thinking like, I don't really want to learn about insurance companies. I don't really want to learn about economics. Why do I need to? This is boring. If I wanted to do this, I would get an MBA or do something else. The reason that we need to learn about this is because it is time for us to be strategic. And looking back on my 30 years as a genetic counselor, 2 in pediatric, 18 in cancer genetics, and now 11 in private industry, one of the things I've realized is I wish I had been more strategic when I was a clinical genetic counselor. I kind of made out a bill, gave it to the billing person, and never thought about it again. And even on the backside, when the money came back to Yale, I wasn't always getting a report of how much revenue we brought in. That information wasn't shared with me. And so as the director of a cancer genetics program, it made me very vulnerable because I was told, boy, you guys really aren't making money, but I couldn't see what we were spending and what we were bringing in. And so in order to be strategic, you have to understand the landscape better than at least I did when I was in that space. I would also say that genetic counselors are good at this, right? So we have a test result come across our desk. We have a patient come in with a gene we've never heard of before. We research the hell out of that and we figure it out. So if you're thinking to yourself, God, I just can't think about something new and learn something new. Oh, yes, you can. And what I'm here to tell you is that you must. We have to care about the money part now, because since we are not currently able to bill as providers to Medicare and Medicaid, and we are beholden upon other healthcare providers doing that billing, it puts us in a vulnerable position. I'm hoping we can change that, but until we do, we need to be able to come up with a very good reason for why health systems should continue to employ certified genetic counselors instead of hiring a physician, a PA, a nurse practitioner, hell, even an audiologist who can bill for genetic counseling services when we can't. And that's one of the things I think we're going to hit on today.
And one thing that as we were preparing for this that I feel like I learned is that we need to separate, and I think Ellen, whose idea was this? Was it your okay, or Sam's idea? Separate genetic counselor from genetic counseling. Can you expand upon that, Sam, and why that's important? Why I, on this show and publicly speaking, should not be using them interchangeably? We're all learning here.
So I put that in a Google Doc and was like, stop doing that. But my apologies. This has actually been a soapbox of mine, I feel like, for 15 years, but now people can't look away anymore. We really need to separate these two. And it is always hard to separate something that is at the core of your identity. So I'm not saying this in a light way. But the reason we need to separate it, genetic counselors are not the only people who can provide genetic counseling, and genetic counselors do more than genetic counseling. And so when we use those interchangeably, we only hurt ourselves. So as Ellen just pointed out, we're not recognized by CMS. So we can't bill for the service that we keep placing our identity so deeply into. And that's really a fundamental thing that we have to look at and really dissect. Is that helping us? Especially when so many of us do so many things beyond genetic counseling. And that can be at our core without being at our identity in its totality.
I think I'm going to struggle with that terminology for a little while, and then I'll get a hold of it. I want to back up in terms of we're talking about genetic counseling and the economics that impact us. Let's go back in time a bit in the timeline to talk about on the student angle. So Maria, being the program director at UConn's genetic counseling master's program, I want to get your thoughts on how this is impacting us on this first part, because the cost of programs are increasing. The cost of secondary education is just increasing in general. I mean, when you look at it compared to generations, it is wild and absurd, I would say, how much it's gone up. What do we need to look at in order to start helping on that front? Because we're talking about the genetic counseling profession, but now going down to the genetic counselor. I'm trying here.
Right. So I think, you said it, what is the student angle and what do students need? And I think it's access, right? So depending on the program, there are varying degrees of what you can do to increase that access. I think a lot of programs have a lot of good ideas, and we should be sharing them with each other to ensure that as a whole, we can educate as many students who are passionate about genetics. And that really comes to kind of what the mission of the program is. And I can really only speak to UConn, and as a newer program, our mission is career development, is keeping a pulse on the job market. And it's not just because we're a new program and we happen to sit in this space right now, but it's such a skill and such an important aspect of being a professional, right? Whether you're a genetic counselor or whether you're anything. I speak to students a lot about adaptability and what our role as genetic counselors is at different tables and all of the varying different tables that we can sit in. And I think it's important for students to get that from day one. If you come in here with an idea, many students come in really understanding kind of the clinical focus of genetic counselors, but not really having a full grasp of where we can be in the world. So for that reason, we have mentorship programs, and we pair our students with folks who are doing what some would consider non-traditional or non-patient facing roles. That's everything from utilization review to we have genetic counselors who are the head of marketing for genetic testing companies. We have folks in industry. There are so many avenues that students could take. I think that, when they're here, then that becomes our job, is to increase their eyes, to open their eyes to the different opportunities that can present themselves. But getting them to the programs is actually quite a challenge. And I think everybody recognizes that, but what are some steps that we can do to do that? And I can speak for UConn. We've started with, our admissions process is a very holistic admissions process. So this is not just you are the GPA that's on your transcript. It becomes, who are you as a person? How passionate are you about this field? What do you know about this field? And why do you want to be here? We as educators understand the extreme commitment it takes for for applicants to even apply. It's a very arduous process. So when you're here, it's also no walk in the park either. So it's going to take determination and commitment. And I think one of the biggest questions I get from applicants, it tends to be, what do you look for in an applicant? What's a quality that you really value? And I will say it's adaptability. And yes, we're a small new program, so there's a lot of adaptations having to happen on the fly with our students. But it's more than that. If you can adapt to a situation that you're not comfortable with, if you're stepping out of a box that you really thought you were going to be in forever, then that's a great skill, and that transcends all the way into the job market, into your profession, and all of the doors that will open. So we really have a focus at UConn on career development, professionalism, and
I'll just add, in almost every interview I did from people across the field, adaptability was the number one thing that they said that they looked for in a genetic counselor, and why they wanted to employ genetic counselors was our inherent adaptability. So well done. You've got you're getting training some great people.
And I think that's such an important point, that we're being able to be adaptable, but also we focus a lot on patient facing skills and roles. And I'm going to say it as myself, maybe a controversial statement, because I worked for Ellen Matlaw for 4 years. So I learned making controversial statements is awesome. So I think, you taught me well, I think we focus too much on patient facing roles in programs. I think programs need to add into curriculum that, and I speak to some programs on how to be an entrepreneur and networking and just building your own roles, which many of you have done, including building your own business like Ellen. And I think that should be part of the curriculum for all programs. I think it's misleading that we focus so much on these are your core cases, and all of that is still important. We're still going to be patient facing roles. Those are always going to exist. I don't mean to minimize that, but we need to expand further. So I guess with that, what are the roles that we need to expand into so that we can expand our whole workforce? Because doing that, I think, brings to good long-term effects. Yeah, I was going to say, who wants to take it?
So I would say in addition to adaptability, I think that one thing we as genetic counselors need to do is to start looking at the field of genetics, not only the way that we always have, which is what is best for the patient, what is best for their family, and what is best for the other providers, right? Those were the things that we focus on in a patient-facing role. But also let's take a look at the business case here. What am I adding to this dynamic that no one else can add? So what skills do we have that we are best fit? And genetic counselors are afraid to say this often. I mean, a lot of times genetic counselors will say, well, I do this part of the job, but it could also be done by the nurse or social worker or the physician. What is it that we bring to the table that no one else brings? And also looking to the horizon and saying, what opportunities are coming down the pike that I am going to train myself now so that I can step into that role? And it's often a role that no one else wants. So I'm going to give you a few recent examples. You may have been reading about DPYD testing and other pharmacogenomic testing that if you carry a mutation in one of these genes and then you develop colon cancer and you get 5-FU or capecitabine or some chemotherapies, your toxicity could be 30 times that of another patient, or you could die from the chemotherapy. And so this has gotten a lot of world attention recently because there have been some high profile people, including physician patients, who've died. And then their family finds out DPYD testing wasn't done. The hospital gets sued, or there's a big settlement. They get terrible publicity. This counts against their scores. So when you come up to are we in the top 100 cancer centers this year? No, you got dinged in US World Report. How can you step into the role of going to the safety officer at your hospital and saying, I'm bringing you some data I've been looking at this. This is something we want to avoid here. Here's how I can play a role in bringing this to our hospital system in a safe and effective way. That is one example of reading the headlines and looking to the future and saying, this is something we could solve, and making yourself the head of that. Now, you may be thinking, I don't want more work, right? Most of the time we don't, but it's those shifts that if you can be the head of it, if you can be, no one else is going to want to do that, right? If you can be the one to present it and to present it to the right people, that could give you a role that can't be taken away from you. Or if you're looking for a job right now and you're a student or you're have a job you don't like or you're unemployed, this might be a way to reach to a health system and to get their attention.
Those types of skills, I think, help you to stand out, to be different, right? So one of the things I instill in students is that, particularly in an uncertain job market, you have to stand out. You have to have not only adaptability, but you kind of have to have something in your pocket that helps you to stand out. And while you're in a program, take advantage of all of those different types of opportunities aside from patient-facing roles where you can learn about where genetic counselors are in this pipeline and what roles that you can play. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you said, Ellen. So
Well, and I think when you're in those programs, right? So when I was going to graduate school and I thought about like, oh, well, maybe I can be in the cystic fibrosis clinic or spina bifida, those were the kinds of things I was thinking about. I wasn't thinking maybe I can shadow an administrator and learn where in my hospital system there are deficits that I could help fill. Or maybe I could learn a little bit about the payer landscape, which, I understand that sounds kind of dismal to some of us, but to some of you, you might be really good at math. You might be really good at problem solving. There are opportunities there. And then to parlay some of those skills that you now have on your resume, and you might, like we were talking this morning with these two speakers about how they use some of the skills and they put it on their resume and said, well, actually, I do have market access information. I'm not even sure I could define what that means, right? But I could look it up. Those are the ways that you can build out your skill set and apply for jobs and plan to apply for 20 jobs to get one interview. That's how you should be looking at it. It's not a matter of failure. It's how hard are you willing to push yourself? Because it's how far you'll push yourself that's going to really have an integral correlation with your success. You need a lot in the failure basket to get a few in the success basket.
I think, oh, I'm sorry, Sam. Oh, no. And I think when I talk to students about job market and finding placement and things like that, that's such an important thing. It's you have to have a mind shift from what it may have been in the past of, looking at a potential employer and saying, what can you do for me in my career, to what I can offer you or this institution or this organization with the varying skill sets that I have. And maybe it's not clinical counseling, but maybe it's scientific communication or a risk assessment or working within an ethical framework or educating. Being able to know what your worth is in terms of what you can bring to the table is so valuable. So we kind of have to have this mind shift of, when students graduate, to tell them this is the best way to approach employers. It's not I would like this job, what can you do for me? But it's how can I fit into this network here?
Or maybe even if I may, what pain points could I help you solve? What problems are you having that I could help you solve? Really figure out what the problems are and how can you like worm your way in there so that then, as they say, you become like a cog in the wheel. It would be very difficult for them to take you out of that, right? Because you're really solving an integral problem.
As somebody who's always been, I like to refer to myself just now as a weird GC because I was always the non. I think it was first non-clinical, then it was non-traditional, then it was non-patient facing. I've been all the nons. And I was talking to somebody a couple years ago, and he said to me, with everything that you do. I run the scientific operations for Nomad, and I have worked on software teams and all these different things. It's like, why do you still feel you're a genetic counselor? And it came out so easily. I was like, well, I'm fascinated by the human response to genetic data, just like every other genetic counselor. And I was like, that's it. We are not trained in genetic counseling. We are trained in the human response to genetic data. And over the last year, my poor husband has to hear me talk about this all the time as I was like whiteboarding out this visual. I'm a very visual person, but it's this wheel that basically breaks down, societal impact, the way technology we interact with it, biological impact, our familial, our psychology, or our own sort of psychosocial impact. And when you start to map that out, within each one of those spokes is multiple job markets. And so we've saturated, or we feel at least, and we're seeing some data that supports it, that we're really saturating our current markets. But when you pull back and look at our training as that, which I 100% stand by, and just more and more since I've seen it, can't unsee it, we have not even begun to tap into it. We have, insurers. If any of you have interest in government, lobbying, we have never seen more of a need for people who can break down complex science and go into any room, because we can have any patient enter our clinic. You can walk into any room and break it down for your Congress, if in Congress or anything else, your local legislature, you'd be able to break down the importance of it and why we need to have research funding, why we need to add something to newborn screening. We can think about this in the biological perspective with variant curation, and thinking about when PRS and germline combine and somatic. I mean, hopefully I'm retired by that point, because it hurts my brain even thinking
We need
about
you.
it.
Please don't.
I don't think I'll ever. But anyway, I really think there's just so much potential for it, but we have to pull back abstractly. We can't get focused on what is just fed to us. We're all always training for the jobs that don't yet exist. I think most of us work within jobs that didn't exist 20 years ago. It's just now I think we're really aware of it. And so you get this fear. You've always been working towards jobs that don't exist inherently. And so just embracing that fear and embracing that unknown, and what do you hear about? What problem do you hear about that gets you to lean in? Go start solving that problem. And for program directors, I don't think you do this, so I'm looking at you, but I'm not blaming you. Stop telling your students they have to go to clinic first. I never went to clinic. And I now counsel patient advocacy groups on their carrier frequency for their entire gene and disease. I'm doing Bayesian analysis. I'm doing the most rudimentary genetic counseling, but it took me traveling through IT and through marketing and software development to build a software tool to understand how to market this stuff in a way that people could appreciate. I had to take that journey to go right back to the most traditional thing, and it made me better. And I didn't need to go to clinic to do any of it.
Yeah, that's such an important point, and I think one that we've seen the last few years. It used to be if you graduated and you went right into industry, ooh, you're starting on the dark side, where it's like, no, now that seems to be more normal and accepted. So we got to keep that trend going. And within the job market, obviously, that's something that we're all focused on. I think, especially Maria, with having students that are always about to graduate, gonna be finding jobs. I'm wondering, and we've heard a little bit earlier in this conference a little about this, but is it still a sustainable business model, these labs, and to have genetic counselors working at these labs? And we often hear, and I don't want to point out any company names during this conversation, there's a lot of them though. It's not just one or two, where they hire a bunch of genetic counselors and then, oh, we're laying a bunch off. And so it's also a very volatile position to be in, where maybe if you're looking at from a financial perspective of what your salary is, yeah, your salary might be higher, but your job security, at least from my perspective, is lower. So what do we think about the economics of the labs and how that affects us in our job positions and just genetic testing too, if I want to just make this an even harder, broader question?
Do you mind if I jump in a little? Okay. I have thoughts. No, so I think that we are seeing signs that labs are starting to perform better, and it's often working inside the current system. So I think what we were witnessing for a while, one was to a race to the bottom in pricing. Whenever you devalue a product, that is the new value of it. And we were witnessing people lowering and lowering the value, and that's not going to work. We're also witnessing the VC kind of tech vibe entering genetics where you're going for big swings. So it's fine if you put out 10 new companies and only one makes it, 9 are going to fail. Looking at people, there's Michael Astion from Plugs uses a term called the halo effect. So, like, if you solve something for Uber, clearly you're going to be able to solve something for genetics. We're still building infrastructure. We don't need disruption. We need infrastructure. You can't disrupt something that doesn't yet have infrastructure. And so I think there's actually more of a space than ever for genetic counselors in the sense that we know the infrastructure that needs to be built. We understand what is really at its core a strong foundation for genetics. And I think if we can be vocal in that and at a time where it is tumultuous, I always pronounce that wrong, that we can come in and bring forth solutions and not just sit there and say, well, that's a problem and that's a problem. You really can be a part of it. We're going through such a pivot. I actually think it's a great opportunity and time for genetic counselors to get in there and start to build the future. And then you become the cog that can't be removed. You understand so much about the field and so much about that company or the process that it makes you invaluable. You're so much more than a variant curator who we can train AI to replace you, or we can let you go and there's unfortunately 10 people behind you who would take that job. You just get a different lens that I think is hopefully where we're headed.
So I want to ask a question that actually Ellen suggested that I asked, I believe. If hopefully I'm attributing the right things here. If you could all implement one policy or institutional change to improve the economic standing of genetic counselors, what would it be? I'm giving you a magic wand. It works once. What are we using it with?
All probably thinking the same.
If you all say the same thing, it will happen as you say it. So yes, let's go for that.
Let's get some bills passed.
Yeah.
Let's get recognized as providers. If I could wave a wand and have that happen, I think that would help. I don't think it would solve everything. And it doesn't really answer some of the questions that we're talking about in terms of where we belong and what seats at what tables we can have. But it certainly would increase that pipeline, that access point for our communities and for the patients that we serve to be able to have access to us. So I think my wand would encompass the Awareness Act.
Even though I agree with you, I'm glad you said it, that it's not going to solve every problem. So there's part of me that's like, don't say passing the bill because that's not going to be the only thing. But I do think that would give us a base and a foundation that would really secure a lot of positions from which we could grow. Yeah, so I think that's slightly reluctantly my answer, but I do think it would make the biggest impact.
So let me just shake things up here for a minute. We're living through times, as we all know, no matter what your political backgrounds, that all of the rules have been thrown out the window. And so instead of thinking about passing a bill, let's think about whom we know, each of us, who might know Dr. Oz, RFK, someone high up in the administration, because all they need to do is sign something and we don't need a bill. All they need to do is recognize the problem, and we might not like a lot of other things that are happening right now. I know I don't. But if we can reach someone who has power in the administration, and if they felt that there was some value, a positive headline that they could get, that, oh, people are saying that we don't follow science. Well, we follow precision medicine and we want genetic counselors to be recognized as providers. We're going to roll that into the next big healthcare act before end of year. It only takes one connection. And so if any of you have that kind of a connection, maybe you know someone who knows someone, those are the kinds of relationships that we can do instead of a bill.
Everything comes back to networking. If I had one thing to say, I'm like, keep networking. You're all here for a reason, right? And I think part of being able to have these conversations, it's tough for genetic counselors to speak highly of themselves, I think is something that I see. And I like that there's a lot of influencers out there and everything, like even outside of our genetic space, that are not afraid to say, like, yeah, I'm confident, like, steal a line from Demi Lovato, like, what's wrong with being confident? And so part of that is also shooting your shot. You guys would not believe how many people I reach out to come on this show that I get no's all the time. It's like dating. I just expect to get rejected a certain amount of the time. And that's what we have to do. So, if anyone has connections to some high up people in genetics for me to be on the show, but more importantly, of people in the administration so that we can talk in the right people's ears. And sometimes I'm at some of these conferences and I end up talking to someone that, started some big company. And they're like, oh yeah, I have a meeting with Elon next week. I'm like, Elon Musk? Like, is that? And that was when he was still tight with Trump. I'm just like, you would not believe, you might be 2 degrees or 1 degree away from someone that has these connections. But yeah, I just want to echo that. Maria?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree. And I think that I'd like to underscore what Ellen said about networking. And sometimes it's not just what you know, it's who you know. But from an educator aspect, I run into a lot of imposter syndrome. So I think it starts back with training and being able to give students opportunities that allow them to kind of develop that confidence. That's a very difficult thing to develop. And I think a lot of students come in with some, like I said, knowledge of where they want to go and, a path that they had determined that would be best for them. And stepping out of that comfort zone is tough. But stepping out of that comfort zone is so important to combat that imposter syndrome, to develop that confidence so that when you graduate, get a job, and go out into the world of this profession, you feel confident as a peer, as a colleague. I heard someone today tell me that they were just a student. And I said, you're not just anything.
Yeah.
Yes, you're a student, but you have so much time to go. You have so many opportunities in front of you. Understand the power that holds. And I think that's tough for people who are newer in the profession and students to grasp. So we try to do a lot of mentorship and advising and cheerleading to help with that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And just even I have definitely adapted the fake it till you make it. Sometimes I'm doing interviews and I'm just like, I don't know how I'm sitting with Francis Collins, but I'm just gonna pump myself up in front of the mirror. I'm Kira Dineen, I got this. And all of a sudden you're doing it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of that. And I think the most successful genetic counselors that I've talked to and interviewed have that mentality. And that's why. We heard from some fantastic people today in the conference so far. Susan Hahn was one of them that she's been on the show before. And it's just remarkable to hear how much she's like, I don't know what I'm doing. We all heard her say that. Like, they just approached me and said, do you want to do this job? If she let that get in the way, we would not have a lot of the policies we do now and all the payer side that a lot of us are intimidated by. So I think, there's just so much importance in that. I realize we have 20 minutes left on stage. Usually people leave 10 minutes for questions. I want to open it up. I'm feeling like Connor. I knew, I said at the beginning, I put it into the universe. Connor would have a question. So happy. I have more questions, but I'd rather get to everybody else's. So Connor, take it away.
Kira. Well, first off, just want to say thank you, everyone. This is a fabulous conversation and echoes a lot of things that kick around in my brain when I'm trying to do other things. But I kind of just want to ask more of a higher level question, and I hope there's some nuggets of wisdom in there. Of you're talking about a lot of step out of your comfort zone, take these opportunities, go and find places where you can make an impact. And you all have a lot of success stories, and that's wonderful. I'm just thinking about the fact that okay, if I'm as Connor Linehan going to literally follow that advice, I got 2 kids at home. I got they rely on my health insurance, right? Like there's practical things I think in the way of a lot of those opportunities. So I'm looking for, could we maybe talk about how to actualize a lot of what you're saying? I see Ellen nodding at me.
So, Connor, here's what I would say to you. Hold on to your job and your health insurance and improve your CV at that job. And so that's what you do. You think to yourself, what have I done recently? What project have I worked on? What kind of patient have I seen? What kind of interaction have I had, maybe with an administrator, maybe with a payer, like the person who does your insurance at your institution, what made me feel like, that's interesting, and I'm kind of good at that. And then set up an appointment with that person. Go and speak to them. Say, I'm a genetic counselor. I'm over here in cancer. Here's what I'm doing. I love it here. But I'd like to learn more about your job. Can you tell me about it? What do you do? What are the problems you're solving for UConn? What kinds of things do you think a clinician like me could add to this? And do you have a weekly or a monthly meeting that I could attend and just listen, kind of learn who does this kind of work, what kind of work you do? Can I just attend it? And you're probably thinking to yourself, I'm already pretty busy, right? Like I don't have a lot of time to add things in. But like any other skill, it's amazing if you do something for 1 hour a month or 1 hour a week, how it adds up over time. It's definitely a new dot on your resume. And next time something comes up and they're like, we'd like a clinician to potentially think of this role, they'll think of you. So you don't have to give everything up and go start a startup. I wouldn't recommend it. Keep your job, keep your health insurance and your paycheck, and build it where you are.
Absolutely. I was going to say, I often talk to people who are like coming to me because, again, of that weird genetic counselor thing. How do I make this pivot? And I say, two of my main pieces of advice. The first one is think of your current role where you both in hard skills and soft skills, or think of a new grad who's like, well, I was told I have to go here, but this is the job available. Your job today is not your career. It's a pit stop if you want it to be, but there is always something to be gathered. There's always something to be learned and to grow from. So see wherever you currently are, I don't think you're alone. A lot of society feels like they are, whether they're stuck or just trying to stay, hunkering down, whatever it is, they want to spend more time at their job for security, typically reasons. You can learn a lot. I would also, the second piece of advice is, I think, as Ellen said, find your sort of inherent interests and begin to kind of find exposure to them. So I was talking to software developers all the time just because of my role. I started to take in free courses online on clinical informatics, not because I wanted to become a clinical informatics informatician, because I wanted to be able to speak their language and cut down the time it took me to communicate with them. So I spent an hour a week occasionally, listening to these talks while I was either doing other work or doing something and learning things. But then slowly I started to actually pick up on these things. And then it started being given to me in my role because I could answer questions, because I could speak to that. The same thing with this economics. Like, I've never taken a business class, but yet all of a sudden I'm walking around telling people about the economics of genetic counselors because I was getting a pit in my stomach and I was doom scrolling on my phone. I was like, well, I should do some focused doom scrolling. So I'm just going to doom scroll about like healthcare and genetics. But then I started reading articles and I started to kind of put things together. It's okay to just see and explore where your own gut is going. Don't try to follow someone else's gut, follow your gut. It's your career. And so I think if you lead with yourself and see where you are going, it becomes more natural. It's not this force like, I'm going to quit my job and go over here and take a big risk. It becomes this really natural path that you're walking.
And if I may, I would even say rather than think of it as a pit stop, think of it as a rung on the ladder that you are climbing to get to your end goal. Every step you take is another rung in the ladder. You may not always recognize it, but you're picking up skills and making connections and developing new skills that will get you to the top of the ladder.
I think we could thank you, Connor.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Connor
Also,
Lenahan for everybody.
Also, for the record, I love my job. I'm not going anywhere. Just wanted to move the conversation along.
In case the hiring team hears this episode.
Hi, Ellen. Hi, Sam. It's Emily Dalton. So I am working medical affairs at Illumina. And just thank you for this conversation. It's really resonating very deeply with me as an industry GC. I've been in industry for over a decade. So, Kira, when I started, it was still a little bit the dark side. But I wanted to dive into that a little bit more because the other hat that I wear is the current co-chair of the Lab and Industry SIG within NSGC. And one thing that I'm really passionate about is trying to keep our industry GCs within our professional organization. And I think we've all seen a migration and kind of disengagement as we find maybe less education, less relevance there. And I do want to give, NSGC some props for with their current strategic plan. I think they're recognizing that and trying to right the ship. So I would love any thoughts from you all about how we can keep industry GCs who may wear very different hats but are still genetic counselors, how we can keep them engaged within our professional society to make sure it's serving that. And then kind of on the flip side, and I know this is a long-winded two-part question, but that's okay. I'll go with it. How industry GCs and industry in general can support our clinical GCs who are fighting so hard for the passage of the bill, which to be honest is not super relevant for those of us who are not practicing clinically, but rising tides raises all ships. So what can we do and how can we make sure that our industry GCs are caring about that and recognizing that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on either and any of those topics.
So I'll answer your second question first, because I think what we all need to realize is that we are all interconnected and all of our economies are interconnected. So, you say, and I felt this way a little bit too. I was in research when we're passing the bill, and it's like, this doesn't really impact me as much. But when you pull back, it actually does, because having that have the ability to be recognized by CMS and being able to bill allows to have more genetic counselors in the clinic. If not, we're seeing more and more movement towards PAs and Ps who are fabulous and wonderful, but don't have the training in genetics and may or may not send testing appropriately, may send too much testing, where we heard about earlier, if you're sending too many patients who aren't covered, then labs are covering that cost and labs may go under. And so recognizing that we really all are connected to each other and that we all need to support each other and we all need to be more transparent about what our issues are so that we can all help each other out. I think sometimes, industry GCs, you don't want to talk about what our issues are in the lab, because then clinical GCs may, look at it differently. And clinical GCs are like, well, you wouldn't understand. We are all interconnected, and it's actually our superpower because we sit across so much of the genetics ecosystem. We know so much and can use that to not just our benefit, but patients' benefits. So I would say that we should push back on that. Why do I have to care about this over here? We should be able to articulate to each other why we should care about our issues, because if we can't articulate it to each other, we certainly can't articulate it to everybody else. The second, I've been on the board for NSGC. I started the student and new member SIG. I have run the PSS, the membership committee, and I am not currently a member. And I think that is something that I am trying to grapple with, of like what would draw me back in as somebody who is such a fierce, advocate and member. But it is that split and divide. I don't always feel like my opinion is needed. I don't always feel at home in that space. And so I think we have to figure that out, because I still feel it, which is odd, because of how much I was a part of it. And so I think now, being on the other side, I'm starting to see it more, but we do need to engage that dialogue because it is happening more and more. It used to be very quiet about it, and now I can just say it on a podcast that now thousands of people are going to hear. Yep. You don't have to cut this part out. But yeah, I think it just shows we do need to start having a dialogue about, again, what is our identity? And the more we go back to our core identity and set up NSGC around that, I think we'll feel less of this divide.
We can take another question on the left, because I think I'm trying to go in order of, yes, go ahead.
Hi, am I too close? My name's Danique. I'm a prospective grad student. I have a question. You guys were talking earlier about kind of finding pockets in the industry and going along with like that out of the box, like thinking and building your own niche. can you speak on like your experience with possible like pushbacks with that? Was there anything that you experienced in just like building your career that, you know, or where you experienced like possible pushback?
You want to start with just today's pushbacks or? Yeah, pushbacks all the time, right? So I would say, I mean, I can remember when I, at age 26, moved to Connecticut to start the program in cancer genetics, a brand new thing at Yale. And some of the pushback I got from the oncology team was, you want to do what kind of testing on our patients, and then you want to remove what parts of their body? And one oncology nurse raising her hand and saying, you want to mutilate our healthy patients? That's disgusting. That's how I started at Yale. So pushbacks, all the time. You have to expect it. You have to go into it saying, I'm going to try some hard things. I'm going to fail. I'm going to try new things. I'm going to get pushback. And you got to keep showing up. You got to keep showing up, and you have to have a good reason behind it. You have to have done your research, made your connections. But now, now I'm a CEO of a startup. Pushbacks? Yep, all the time.
It's so true, Ellen. Oh my goodness. I'm going to keep this short. But I think the key is to expect pushback and expect it in places you didn't expect it before, right? I think some of my strongest pushbacks have been within my own institution, supporting a somewhat non-traditional modality of a graduate program. I have data to stand on now to show that our recipe is working and our students are successful. But I can tell you that I expected pushback from lots of other members of the community and even genetic counseling profession at large. But within my own institution, I had to defend and help educate them on how online learning is successful. Was not something I expected.
And pushback for years and years and years that you persisted to create the genetic counseling program at UC.
So they have one in Connecticut. Yeah.
Like we're talking years and years and years, and she stuck it out and succeeded.
So I think the other question that I get from, or the other answer I give to applicants who ask about qualities that we look for in programs is perseverance. You have to understand that the things that you are passionate about, if you don't do well the first time or someone tells you no, does not mean you don't belong there. Keep going, especially if you're passionate about it. It'll happen.
And set up your network of the people who you trust and believe in you and know what your core mission is so that you can go back to them and vent when you get pushback. But you have your sort of people who understand you and just lean on them because it is years of pushback. It can really feel arduous, but I tend to think that if you're getting pushback, it means you're doing something right. So not always we have to listen to ourselves and know when sometimes we're not. But if you're getting pushback, that's not a bad thing. Kind of, it's a mind game with yourself. But have your core people who support you in it.
Yeah, look for those cheerleaders. You're going to need them.
Not a reflection of who you are or where you're going. The people that you're talking. I was rejected on my 40th birthday for a program, and I was like, I don't care. We're going to keep going, and this is where we are. So.
I only got into one, or I mean, I only got an interview at one. So
Pre-match.
Yeah.
Yes. Just so other people understand what that means. Yeah. Pre-match. Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I'm also from the prospective student side. I really love talking about the adaptability piece. I think that's a really amazing skill to have as a GC. I also think that, Maria, to your point of having that coming into a program is very valuable. So my question would be for people interested in the field or prospective students, what sort of experiences would you suggest or tips to gain that skill?
Put yourself out there. Get rejected. Try something new. That you don't get adaptability and resiliency without serious falling on your face, bumps and bruises. I think it's something that we underappreciate. And being honest about the times that you fail. And it's okay. Like people will be like, oh, don't use the word failure. I'm like, no, fail. I have failed and it's cool. And I'll sit down and talk to you about it because I want you to feel normal when you hit those things. So it really just takes putting in the reps and having some times that you try to pivot and maybe it doesn't work, but then you figure out where you're nimble, and that's where the adaptability comes from, because you'll have the times that you didn't do it and it won't be as scary anymore, and then you'll have the times that you're like, oh, I made that pivot really quick. Turns out I'm really good at doing this or doing that. So, yeah.
And I think to remember that, adaptability doesn't always come from some large catastrophic event or something that you've been working for that didn't work out. Look back on yourself at the things that you've done and where you've gone. You have some mistakes or failures or places where you met adversity. You just got over them maybe quickly because they didn't shake you that much. So go back and think about those small things and how you dealt with those and why they were small to you at that point, because they might have been very big for someone else. And that means you probably do have a certain inherent level of adaptability already. So
Kinga, you want to share?
Hi, my name is Kinga. I'm also a prospective student and applicant this year. My question is, we've talked about all these different niches where you're seeing genetic counselors enter the field. What fields do you expect to see genetic counselors kind of move into in the next 5 to 10 years?
I heard for the first time about a genetic counselor who entered banking. And so I think we should look for genetic counselors to move into venture capital, private equity, some of the places with money, because then when you have a company like mine who's going out on a roadshow saying, here are the reasons you should fund my company, if there's a genetic counselor on the financial side who understands the needs and the opportunities and the upside for whoever is giving you that money, that's when the whole field starts to change. And so years ago, I was involved in a big lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court. And one of the things I noted when I was there was that there was no one at the intersection of law and genetics. No one understood both. And I'm finding that in almost every area. So technology and genetics, there only are a few. Like all of these intersections. So if some of you are bringing an intersection to your life and you could combine that with genomics, it could be podcasting. It could be social media. It could be writing. It could be you have a background. I mean, it was very interesting when we were talking about an actuarial background in an earlier session. All of these skill sets, when combined with genetics, will make our field stronger. And that's what we need is to take this genetics skill set and put it out in the real world so that we can actually have some strength and some leverage outside of just the typical healthcare setting.
100%. One cool one that I just heard that never dawned on me was veterinary science. And actually genetic counseling for breeders to help them understand, consanguinity within their own line. I was like, and that the field is actually wondering why they don't have genetic counselors in the veterinary space. And I was like, that's amazing. And I immediately was telling some of my friends who love dogs, I was like, please go apply for these jobs and expand the field and cuddle some dogs at the same time. But I think one of the things that you were saying about these intersectionality, I think some of it is in the way that program directors and programs recruit students. We talk so much about diversifying the field, but we very rarely think about if we don't have a diverse output, we're never truly going to get as diverse of an input as we want, because we're specifically saying we want this type of brain, we want this type of way of approaching things and thinking about things. You need these types of majors, and we do need those backgrounds. But the two major things that I think we don't talk enough about when we're talking about diversifying our field is, one, going back to the cost. There's a whole study that came out recently, Greer et al., I think it was last year, about the fact that we ask our students to put themselves in financially precarious positions. You're not supposed to spend more than 10% of your discretionary income on student loan debt, but genetic counselors on average are 14%. And we don't talk about enough the financial sort of impact of that, and being okay with telling people then go into a higher margin job to make up for it if you had to take out more student loan debt. I think also we don't think about somebody with a banking background who says, hey, I want to learn about genetics so I can be in VC. If you're a program director, recruit that person, because we do need VCs that have genetics counseling, and think about, again, that human aspect to it. If your business model, somebody comes to you and says, the best business requires every single person to have a genome sequenced at birth. We saw that on this thing. A genetic counselor will tell you that will never, ever, ever happen because humans have the ability to say no to things. And someone is going to say no to having their genome sequenced at birth. Well, not the baby, but the parent. And that's okay. That is allowed. We should have that autonomy to do it. And so they can break down those business models ahead of time before somebody goes out there saying, oh yeah, we're going to solve everything. We just need every person to have their genome sequenced. I think we have this perspective that really is incredibly important at the beginning of business. I think Ellen has done amazing things, and it's having somebody on the other side for VCs who understand that would be really powerful.
Just add one parting thought. And I assume you're asking this question because you're thinking, what track can I put myself on to set myself up for success when I get into school and then graduate? I caution you against that because I think that's kind of what got us here, right? So I want you to think about what your passions are. What are your interests outside of genetics? Like, what other skills do you have that you want to build on? And then work within the program that you go to build on those skills, to build a niche for yourself. It shouldn't matter where everybody else is going.
I think that's time. Thank you so much for all of the questions and for being such a great audience.
Thanks for watching DNA Today. To access all of our episodes, head over to dnatoday.com. We also have a lot of bonus content on there that you can enjoy. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, guest pitches, you name it, send them in to info@dnatoday.com. We'd also really appreciate if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more nerds like yourself find the show. Also, if you like giveaways and other ways to connect with us, I recommend following us on social. We're at DNA Today Podcast. We also have a Patreon if you want to be the most level involved in the show. That's also at DNA Today Podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Join us next time to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.